Magnesium appears to be some sort of wonder drug, treating everything from sleep to hot flushes. I use it in the emergency department for life-threatening heart, lung, and pregnancy problems. It would seem there's very little it can't do. But the science is actually fascinating. A lot of what you might think about magnesium turns out to be wrong. The real question should be, is there any actual evidence that it can do any of what it's supposed to do? So in this video, I'm going to explain what magnesium is, how it works, and why there are so many varieties on the shelf. And then I'll break it down into 3 groups: when magnesium is definitely recommended, when it's worth a try, and when it's a waste of money. Plus lots of useful tips on how to decide if it's worth it for you. I'm Dr. Eoghan Colgan. I've been a doctor in the NHS for nearly 25 years. Let's get into it. Let's start with what magnesium actually is. Magnesium is a mineral, a basic chemical element like iron, potassium, copper that comes from rocks and soil and gets taken up by plants and mostly reaches us through what we eat. And we have evolved to need these elements to function. Now, your body holds about 25 grams of magnesium, most of it locked away in your bones, and a tiny amount, less than 1%, is in your bloodstream. This is the portion that blood tests measure. Now, one of the reasons magnesium may have such wide-ranging benefits is because it's involved in over 600 different reactions in your body. Energy production, muscle contraction, regulating blood pressure, making DNA. It is genuinely important. And the thing is, intake is genuinely low. In the US, around half of adults aren't getting enough magnesium from their diet. In the UK, it's lower, but still meaningful. Either way, there's a lot of people walking around a bit low. And as we'll come back to, it's those people who may experience benefits to supplementation. Now, magnesium on its own is very unstable, so it has to be attached to something, a carrier, so it can sit safely on a shelf as a tablet. Glycinate is magnesium attached to the amino acid glycine, citrate is attached to citric acid, oxide is attached to oxygen. They're not different drugs, it's the same magnesium just delivered in slightly different vehicles. And the reason there are so many vehicles is that different chemicals deliver the magnesium in slightly different ways. Some absorb a bit better, some don't really absorb at all and stay in the gut, making it more useful for gut issues, for example. Now, there's a lot of debate around which is best, but here's the surprising thing. There's never been a study that compared 2 forms head to head and showed if one produced a better outcome for the same condition. Not one. The studies might show which one ends up more in your urine, but does that matter? So when you see high absorption magnesium on a label, that's a genuine chemistry claim. But will it make your sleep, your migraines, your brain better? Well, we're coming back to that shortly. Before we get there, a quick word on safety. Magnesium is generally one of the safest supplements you can take. The most common side effect, and really the only one most people experience, is gastrointestinal upset, nausea, cramping, loose stools, and usually only if you exceed the upper limit of 350 milligrams a day in the US and 250 in Europe. There are a few people who should be careful, anyone with significant kidney disease, because the kidneys can't clear magnesium properly, so they are at risk of having too much in their body. And if you're on certain medications, thyroid tablets, some antibiotics, bone strengthening drugs called bisphosphonates, magnesium can stop them being absorbed properly, so you need to space them out by a couple of hours. But for most people, it's safe and cheap. Okay, so that's the foundation. Now let's get to whether you should actually take it and what for. So I'm going to give you 3 groups. Group 1, conditions I would definitely prescribe magnesium for. The evidence is pretty strong. Group 2, the evidence is lacking, but it's probably worth a try. And Group 3, the evidence would suggest it's a waste of money. Now keep in mind, like most supplements, the benefits are likely to be experienced by people who are deficient in magnesium. If you get plenty in the diet, you're probably unlikely to experience benefit, except in 2 conditions. And that's why these conditions are in Tier 1. So the 2 conditions I would recommend magnesium for, the first is migraine prevention. Now the headline trial goes back to Germany in 1996, daily magnesium for 12 weeks, significantly reduced migraine frequency versus placebo. Now, other trials have followed since, some positive, some negative, but the overall body of evidence has been good enough that the American Academy of Neurology lists magnesium as probably effective for migraine prevention. Now, that's not a miracle cure, it's a careful, considered verdict from a guideline committee that doesn't hand them out lightly. So, if you're someone who gets recurrent migraines, magnesium is one of the cheapest, lowest risk options you have. Now, the studies used 400 to 600 milligrams of elemental magnesium. That's the actual amount of magnesium inside the tablet, which you'll see on the label. And a really important point, give it 12 weeks before you decide whether it's working. It works in the background as a preventer rather than a treatment for migraine attacks. The second condition is constipation. Now, this is where the carrier matters. Multiple trials show that magnesium oxide reliably helps chronic constipation, including in people on GLP-1 medications like Ozempic and Wegovy, which slow the gut down. Now, why oxide? Well, it doesn't absorb very well from the gut, and for most conditions that would be a problem, but for constipation, that's why it's so helpful. Magnesium that stays in your gut pulls water into the bowel, softening the stool. It's an osmotic laxative. Now, glycinate or threonate, which are absorbed more efficiently into the body, won't do this as well. So if you take either of those versions, you might want to switch to magnesium oxide, and it happens to be cheaper too. So that's tier 1, migraine prevention and constipation. The evidence is strong, and the magnesium can be helpful whether you are getting enough magnesium in your diet or not. The second tier is where the evidence is more modest, and these are the conditions where supplementation seems to only really benefit those who have a low dietary intake of magnesium. If your diet is already decent, you're probably not going to feel much benefit, but magnesium is cheap and it's safe, so if you've got one of these issues, it's probably worth trying. Now let's start with sleep, probably the commonest reason people use magnesium. Now, the evidence here is actually pretty weak. Small trials with small effects. The most recent meta-analysis showed magnesium added about 16 extra minutes of sleep compared to placebo, which actually wasn't statistically significant. Now, there are a couple of newer trials in 2024 and 2025. These showed small effects, but mostly in older adults whose diets were probably low to begin with. So, small effect, possibly real, but not transformational. If you want to try it, glycinate is the form most people tolerate without gut upset because it's absorbed efficiently rather than staying in the bowel. 200 to 300 milligrams in the evening, but try it for at least 4 weeks because in trials that worked, that's roughly when the effect emerged. And if you don't notice anything after 4 weeks, this isn't going to be your fix. Stop and try something else. Now, I've only tried magnesium for one thing, and that was for sleep. I possibly fell off to sleep a bit quicker, but didn't always feel great the next day, a little fuzzy and a little bit headachy. In the end, fixing my stress issues and having a regular schedule solved the issue. Most poor sleep comes from things that no pill is going to solve. If you don't sleep well, try it, but there are likely other issues that need addressed. And there's more about that in my free guide, link in the pinned comment and description below. Next is anxiety. The evidence here is pretty limited. The most thorough review of the literature concluded the studies were suggestive of a beneficial effect, but the quality of the evidence is poor. The clearest signal is in PMS or premenstrual syndrome, so a 4-week trial is reasonable, but it's not a treatment for an anxiety disorder. And blood pressure is a bit more interesting. A 2025 meta-analysis pooled 38 trials in over 2,700 people. The overall effect on systolic blood pressure was modest, about 3 millimeters of mercury, but in people with high blood pressure who also had low dietary magnesium intake, typically those on long-term acid-reducing medications or diuretics, or just eating a poor diet, systolic blood pressure dropped by nearly 8 points. Now that is significant. So if you've got high blood pressure and you're in that group, magnesium is a legitimate addition to whatever your doctor has already prescribed, but not a replacement. So that's tier 2, sleep, anxiety, high blood pressure, modest effects, mainly in people who are a bit low to begin with, worth a 4-week trial if it applies to you. And finally, the third tier. This is where I think you might be wasting your money. Three things that get marketed heavily, but the evidence doesn't justify the spend, and in some cases, there are far better alternatives. Let's start with leg cramps, the most popular reason older adults take magnesium. Now, the mechanism is plausible, the calming of overactive nerves, but the evidence is clear. In 2020, the Cochrane collaboration, the highest tier of medical evidence we have, and with no commercial funding, pulled together every decent trial of magnesium for leg cramps and concluded we are moderately certain magnesium does not produce a clinically meaningful reduction in nocturnal leg cramps. Which makes sense in a way. Most older adults with cramps have completely normal magnesium levels. The cramps are not happening because of low magnesium, they probably come from misfiring nerves in the spinal cord, so no amount of magnesium is going to fix it. What does help with cramps? Stretching the affected muscles before bed, staying well hydrated, and reviewing any medications you're on with your doctor, particularly diuretics and statins, which can make cramps worse. Next is hot flushes. Now, the menopause supplement market has gone in hard promoting it to perimenopausal women, but the evidence is weak. One early pilot study, small, no placebo arms, suggested a benefit, but a better, larger randomized trial, high-dose magnesium for 8 weeks versus placebo, was a negative. No impact on frequency or severity. Now, there are some other trials coming, so this may change, but for now, the evidence doesn't support it. What does work for hot flushes? Hormone replacement therapy is the most effective treatment by some distance, and we now know it's safer than we used to think for most women. SSRI antidepressants help some women. There's good evidence for cognitive behavioral therapy, specifically tailored for menopause, and cooling strategies, sleep environment, layered clothing, identifying triggers like alcohol or spicy food. And finally, magnesium L-threonate, marketed as the brain magnesium. Now, this is the most expensive form on the shelf, sometimes 50 to 100 times more per milligram than oxide. But unlike the other forms, it crosses into the brain better and supposedly protects cognition. But it's worth being honest about the trials. The original evidence is a rat study from 2010. The 4 human trials showing positive effects are all small, fairly weak studies funded by companies that sell the supplement and did not show convincing proof of benefit. The one independent trial showed no benefit, but again, not a perfect study. So does this justify the expense? Well, in my opinion, you're paying a premium for a story that hasn't been proven in humans yet. Perhaps future trials may change this opinion, but for now, if you want to invest in your brain, the evidence is much stronger for sleep, exercise, social connection, and learning new things than for any of these supplements. And if you'd like to ensure adequate magnesium in your diet, or you're just not sure if you already get enough, the foods richest in magnesium are nuts, seeds, leafy greens, beans, whole grains, and dark chocolate, foods that make up a Mediterranean-style diet, which also happens to be the best evidence diet for longevity, heart disease, and dementia risk. If you enjoyed this video, you may also like my other videos on realistic and practical health and longevity. There's a link on screen now. And don't forget to subscribe for future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care.